Hector arrives with groceries from the store to the newly purchased house in the woods, where his wife Clara greets him. After handing everything over to her, he goes upstairs to rest for a while. However, he can't fall asleep, and after struggling for a bit, he decides to explore the surroundings. To do so, he finds a pair of binoculars among his things. Suddenly, Hector hears the phone ringing, a number that none of his acquaintances know yet. Surprised, Hector answers, but there's only silence on the other end. Just then, his wife calls him, and startled, Hector drops the phone without hanging up. Clara doesn't understand his worry and quickly reassures him. Later, sitting outside on the lawn near his house, Hector happens to see a half-naked girl in the woods through his binoculars. His wife distracts him by coming to ask for the car keys as she decides to go to the store again. Once she leaves, Hector, driven by curiosity, decides to investigate what's going on in the woods and heads out. He steps onto the road where he sees an overturned trash can and an abandoned bicycle and enters the forest. Soon he comes across a pile of clothes, and just beyond, a woman seemingly unconscious is sitting in a clearing. Surprised, Hector decides to approach her and check what's happening. However, he is suddenly stabbed in the arm with scissors by a stranger whose face is hidden behind bloody bandages. Fleeing from him, Hector hides in the woods. Peeking out, he sees the strange figure scanning the area, pretending to use binoculars with his hands. Terrified, Hector runs and soon reaches a tall fence. He climbs over it and finds himself in front of a building that appears to be some kind of lab. However, no one is inside. In one of the rooms, Hector finds a bandage and a first aid kit and wraps his wound. Later, he finds a radio and contacts someone from the staff. The unknown person informs him that outsiders are not allowed in the lab and asks him to leave. Hector explains about the strange encounter in the woods and the chase. The person asks him to stay calm and promises to come soon to figure out what to do next. However, after some time, the person on the radio tells Hector that he sees the man with the bandaged face and suggests Hector run to a nearby house on the hill. The pursuer won't be able to spot him because he's on the other side. Terrified, Hector steps outside, where the lights along the path suddenly turn on, activated by the unknown person helping him. This person continues to guide him, describing the bandaged man's movements. Unexpectedly, the lights go out, and the person orders Hector to run faster as he's lost sight of the pursuer. Out of breath, Hector stumbles halfway when he hears the sound of an engine. The person on the radio informs him that the pursuer has found a car and is heading towards the house on the hill, urging Hector to hurry. When Hector finally reaches the tower at the top of the hill, he meets a scientist with an unknown device. The scientist offers him a hiding place inside a container filled with white liquid, assuring Hector that the pursuer won't find him there and promising to join him later. Though Hector is hesitant to trust the man, he climbs into the container and sees the lid close. For a while, he struggles to breathe in the white liquid, but the lid soon opens and he tumbles out. The room is bathed in light, and before him stands a surprised scientist who doesn't understand who Hector is or how he got there. Shocked, Hector steps outside and realizes that morning has already come. The scientist starts asking questions that Hector doesn't have answers to. While the scientist tries to explain the purpose of his machine, Hector raises the binoculars and sees his house, Clara, and himself. The scene from the previous morning is repeating. Hector sits down on the ground, and the scientist, equally stunned, realizes that Hector has traveled back in time to the morning of the previous day. The lab owner, calling him Hector 2, explains that the man in the house and the one now in the lab are the same person. Soon, Hector 1, the one in the house, will go into the woods and repeat the events of yesterday. Therefore, Hector 2 should wait until Hector 1 arrives at the lab in the evening and travels back in time, allowing Hector 2 to go home. Believing the explanation, Hector 2 waits patiently at first, but then starts wondering if the events won't happen if he doesn't cause them. He dials his own phone number and hears his own voice on the other end. He quickly hangs up, but Hector 1's phone remained connected, allowing the scientist to hear the conversation from the bedroom. The scientist is angry because he had told Hector 2 not to interfere. He then asks if Hector remembers this call from his past. Hector admits that everything is happening exactly as it did in his day. The scientist urges Hector to avoid doing anything that would prevent Hector 1 from getting into the tank. Otherwise, he will cease to exist. The scientist leaves, and after some thought, Hector decides to take action. He steals a car to ensure the events play out as they already did. On the road, he encounters the same girl from the woods, riding her bicycle toward him. Confused, Hector pulls over, just as a red van drives his car into a ditch. The car crashes into a tree, and Hector sustains a head injury from which blood begins to flow. He removes the bandage from his arm, wraps it around his head, and realizes that he is the bandaged stranger who had been chasing him. At that moment, the concerned girl who had heard the sounds of the crash finds him and helps him using scissors, since she is a hairdresser and always carries them. Hector, remembering the events of yesterday, steals the scissors. Then he finds an old coat in the overturned trash can and puts it on. He asks the girl to follow him into the woods, and though reluctant, she does. When she finally decides to leave, Hector threatens her with the scissors and forces her to undress, but she runs away. Hector too tracks her down, and she is forced to start undressing again. This is the scene Hector 1 sees from his lawn. Hector 2 forces the girl to walk to the rock and take off her pants, but when Hector turns away, she strikes him and runs off. Hector 2 chases her, grabs her, and they both tumble off a cliff. The girl hits her head and loses consciousness. Realizing this, Hector 2 drags her to the rock and undresses her just as he had seen her the day before. As soon as he completes these actions, Hector 2 hears Hector 1's voice, who has just arrived at the clearing. He attacks his former self and Hector 1 flees. Hector 2 returns to the rock to help the girl, but she is no longer there. At this point, Hector 2 begins mimicking binoculars with his hands, scanning the forest. Thinking he has completed all the actions his pursuer had performed the day before, Hector sits down on the grass, but suddenly hears a scream from the woods. He runs toward the sound and finds the girl's necklace. He realizes that someone else is involved and that she's in danger. Thinking she might have gone to his house, Hector runs after her and enters the house. Hector 2 tries to find the runaway, but someone strikes him with a wooden table on the stairs, causing him to tumble down. After regaining consciousness, he climbs back upstairs, where he finds an open window and a ladder. He steps out onto the roof, but there's no one there. He then hears noises from inside the house and returns to the room. Discovering a locked door, he tries to explain to the girl that this is his house and asks her not to call anyone until he explains everything that has happened to him. The door suddenly gives way, and as he rushes inside, he hears the girl's footsteps on the roof. Hector tries to stop her, grabbing her leg, causing her to fall to the ground with a scream. Hector looks down and sees the body of his wife. It turns out that Clara was the one running away from the unknown figure and had fallen to her death from the roof. He weeps for a while, realizing his loss. But then thunder rumbles above, reminding him that he heard this sound over the radio when he was in the lab. But now, he's in the house, meaning that Hector 1 won't get scared and climb into the tank. He pulls out the radio from his pocket and hears yesterday's conversation with the scientist. In despair, he rushes out of the house, gets into the car, and drives to the lab. There, he attacks the scientist, demanding to be sent back to yesterday. When the scientist refuses, Hector begins to destroy the lab. The scientist blames the energy output, but Hector notices that one element is missing from the machine. He strikes the scientist, who admits he deliberately threw it away to prevent the machine from being used again, as things are only getting more complicated. Hector suddenly wonders why the scientist did this. Did he already know it would happen this way? The scientist has to admit that there were 3 Hectors. The third, who was supposed to be the second, hid when Hector 2 emerged from the tank. He appeared just 40 seconds earlier and followed behind him, so the time gap was minimal. Later, he contacted the scientist via radio, explained everything that would happen next, and ordered him to stop the second Hector. The scientist had tried to do this, as things were only getting more complicated with each iteration. Hector then asks the scientist to shine a light so he can destroy the radio. In the flashlight's beam, Hector sees the missing element of the time machine lying in the grass. Sirens blare in the distance, and Hector demands to be sent back. This is how he becomes Hector 3. After getting out of the machine, he tells the scientist that the machine works and gives him instructions on how to deal with the other versions of himself. Hiding, Hector 3 watches the actions of the other 2 Hectors. Then, after leaving the lab, he drives away in an electric cart. But upon seeing a red van, he switches vehicles and drives onto the road, where he spots the girl and rams Hector 2's car, causing both vehicles to crash. He contacts the scientist via radio, blaming him for turning the machine on in the first place. The girl, having escaped from Hector 2, finds him at this moment. This was the scream he had heard in the forest. The girl says she saw a house nearby and suggests they go there. Together, Hector 3 and the girl enter his own house, and while the girl looks for someone, Hector's wife Clara stumbles upon him. She is very frightened, thinking burglars have broken into the house, and informs him that she called the police. Hector 3 hides his wife in the garage and goes to confront Hector 2. First, he hits him over the head with a wooden table, and while Hector 2 is unconscious, Hector 3 leads the girl to the bedroom, puts his wife's red coat on her, cuts her hair with scissors, and advises her to flee to the attic. Then Hector 3 goes downstairs, takes his wife to the lawn in front of the house, and, sitting her in a lounge chair, calmly asks her to remain calm. Soon they hear the sound of a fall from the roof, but Hector holds Clara back and she stays put. Hector 2, believing he has killed his wife, drives to the lab, while Hector 3 sits with his wife on the lawn, waiting for the coming rain and the arrival of the police. A great example of a low-budget film with a strong script and a skilled director, managing to create something interesting within a tired cliché. The film delights with its intense action and intriguing plot twists, plus its atmosphere of doom and an unsettling ending.